welcome everybody. Welcome to this, I don't know, I would have a number in my head, Martin, but you've knocked it right out of my head, how many EOCCS webinars this is. But what we're doing today is not only talking to our friends in our online community, which is half of the EOCCS work, the EFMD online course certification system work, is building that community of good practice, sharing lessons that we've learned in an area that we all have a shared interest in, really, you know, getting it right for our students. And that's the key thing. How can we get better and better at what we're doing? Because this is a new world, it's a new medium, it's a new thing. And today's, and say the other half of what we do with the certifications of courses, and it doesn't have to be courses that we look at, don't all have assessments. You know, many MOOCs don't have assessments, and yet they are very valuable learning opportunities. So, you know, we're not always seeing assessments working in the courses we certify. So today, though, as I said, is about online assessment, and we've gathered together for you three different panelists from different areas of expertise in this whole environment of online learning. And first of all, you can see there's Sarah Knight, who's head of learning and teaching transformation. I'm reading this, Sarah, off my other screen. Higher education at JISC, which is the UK based, but basically it's the digital glue that holds UK universities together and good practice within the digital world. But these are lessons that outside of the UK others can tap into and learn from. We've also got an old friend, Martin Butler, from Professor Martin Butler, from Head of Teaching and Learning, University of Stellenbosch Business School in South Africa. Welcome, Martin. Martin, if you've been to previous, in fact, our symposium, you'll have heard Martin speak before, but there's a particular take on online assessment. You think about the geography of South Africa and how that becomes very important to offer that as an option. And from sort of the world of industry and a company everyone will have heard of, I've no doubt, Mark Espinola, who's Senior Director of Product Management, Grading and Feedback at Turnitin, the scourge of all those students who think they can get away with it. But Mark is here to help us understand what might be you know, some of the issues around assessment, online assessment, and how someone like Turnitin can support academics in doing things this way. So without further ado, what we're going to do is ask you what your role is. We do this at the beginning of every webinar, just to ask you, you know, what direction you're coming from. It helps our panelists frame the question. So there's going to be a poll comes up when Camilla presses the button. That's it. How would you describe your role? So there's a few choices there, and if there's too many in the other box, we will ask them for examples. Okay, thank you very much for that. There's 19 people participated. Oh, everyone's having a go at that. Thank you. That already is looking. Give it 5 more seconds, Camilla, and then we can close it off. But that shows us we've got a range of different people, different interests, different stakeholders in this whole enterprise of assessment online. And that is great. So I'm sure we're going to have a brilliant discussion around that. I'll invite everyone here to post questions initially into the chat, either as we're going along, and if it's a particularly striking question, we'll stop proceedings and ask ask that question, but the plan is to allow our panelists to discuss this area before we hand over to you all to ask specific questions that you may have. So I think we're sharing the results of that, so I can see the mix there, but you can see we've got representatives of lots of different areas in this sphere. Okay, let us begin. And if I can ask everyone other than our panelists to ensure their microphones are closed, you can have your cameras on or off, that's entirely up to you. We will begin with a nice open question. And I'll ask it of Sarah, first of all, ladies first. What are the key challenges in this area when you come to online assessment? What are the big issues that schools, colleges, universities are dealing with?
Well, thank you, Keith, and thank you for the opportunity of being able to share our work from JISC. We conducted a survey of higher education institutions within the UK towards the end of last year, and were able to gather some of the challenges that universities are facing. We broke those challenges down into 3 areas: around pedagogical challenges, around technical challenges, and around challenges relating to culture. And I don't think we had anything back that perhaps surprised us. And I'd be very interested to hear whether some of the challenges that I'll share with you are similar to those that you experience within the context of your work. But first and foremost, in terms of pedagogical challenges, one of the key areas related to accessibility and inclusivity. And partly this may be because in the UK, we have to ensure that our assessment practices and auditorial practices are accessible and inclusive and comply with the legal compliance that we have in this space. So certainly in relation to assessment and feedback, institutions were quite challenged in relation to ensuring that the technologies that they're using, the practice they're using, does meet those requirements. But secondly, and I think this is a result of COVID, staff were also recognising the challenge of rethinking their assessment design. We know that there was a pivot and a shift to online learning, remote delivery of learning, and of course, for many institutions as well, introducing for the first time digital online exams. And now we're moving out of the pandemic. Institutions are grappling with how they keep some of the things that worked well, but how they also reintroduce a blended approach for their students, both in relation to learning, but also in relation to assessment design. And thirdly, in our pedagogic challenge area was academic integrity. And I'm sure this is something that we will be speaking about during the course of the webinar. And of course, that is a key pedagogical challenge, because if we are designing our assessments in a way that limits the ability to cheat, this becomes a lesser issue for us. Technical challenges, perhaps a surprise that interoperability is still a key issue, and 83% of our respondents reported that as the main technological challenge. We would hope by now that we would have systems that do talk to each other better, but there is still a need to continue to promote the well-established open standards that exist. And lastly, just to add to the area around culture, staff resistance to change still perhaps remains the most persistent cultural challenge, and followed by students not engaging with feedback. And I think those are 2 areas where we still need a lot more work to be done, both in terms of ensuring our students have got assessment literacy and are able to really understand the benefits of assessment and feedback as part of their learning. And of course, working with staff to ensure that we are moving their practice forward and really being able to capture the benefits of online assessment and feedback. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Martin, can I come to you? Can you echo any of those and even sort of add to them from your experience? What are the challenges in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Thanks, Sarah, for getting the ball rolling. Yes, I think I'm very comfortable with the categorization. I was thinking as Sarah was speaking, I think probably everything that we've experienced, and in my experience of my peers at other institutions around Southern Africa, is the same. I think I'd like to highlight two things that kind of straddles some of the categories that Sarah has created. And the one for me is construct relevance. And it's something that came to the fore in some of our student forums, where we engage with the students and we ask the students, not necessarily the institutions, about their reservations around online assessment. And one of the questions that emerged from the students is, are you actually testing what you think that you are testing? If I'm being tested for a financial course, are you testing my computer literacy, my connectivity, or are you testing my ability to do a return on investment and a discounted cash flow? So I think, and it relates to what Sarah has said in terms of the pedagogical design, but it also relates to the technological component and the technological literacy. And I think we need to be extremely careful that we don't think that we are measuring a construct that sits within what we are teaching, when there's many other moderators that also influences that. And then the one that came very strongly for the students around specifically online proctoring was invasion of privacy. Now, I know there's a lot written about that, and we don't have to go into the detail of that, but the students do have reservations around being proctored online in the real time, depending on the kind of service that we have as well.
Thank you very much. And let's say in this section to Mark, to ask what do you notice from your clients from Turnitin, and what is Turnitin working on to help in this sort of area?
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of what was been said by Sarah and Martin, but just a concept of having a level playing field for all students is a real big challenge for online assessments, and also for humanity in general. Whether you have a traditional assessment or an online assessment, this means providing a variety of measures like what Martin was talking about, so that all students have equal opportunity to demonstrate mastery. And we also need to be very careful about just bias in our questions. So there can be an implicit bias in a question. So I think, just a concept, whether it's online or paper, thinking about having everyone having the equal opportunity to respond to a question and to be able to demonstrate that they've learned the topic that's being taught. From a technology perspective, I think we're talking about internet access. I mean, a lot of assessments, particularly during the pandemic, just fell on their face just because the simple blocker that students don't have adequate internet access. And we're not just talking about just having access. I mean, you have to have higher speed access for a lot of these assessments. As it relates to Turnitin, I have one of my products in their portfolio takes a hybrid approach. It allows students to upload paper exams, even with a cell phone, in order to get kind of the best of both worlds, right? So you can have a variety of assessments that could be a problem set. It could be, filling out a balance sheet and then uploading that. And then digitally, it's transformed and there's workflows to make the grading much quicker and faster. So that's kind of some of the things that we're seeing.
Indeed, and I'll keep with you, Mark, if I may, because I'm sure when you and your guys are sort of meeting with higher education establishments, you want to establish, there's benefits to what we can offer you. So from your perspective as a provider into this space, what are the key benefits that an operation like Turnitin can offer to universities?
So this might sound a little bit different than you'd be expecting, but I see online assessments and technology as an avenue for us to increase teacher productivity, and also to help teachers engage students with quality, timely, and consistent feedback. So, to give an example, my teams right now are researching how to reduce grading times dramatically by reimagining reusable comments within a fully accessible, it's something that Sarah was talking about, interactive PDF document viewer. So addressing accessibility, which is very difficult within PDFs, and then also addressing, saving time, because it takes a lot of time to create quality, personalized feedback. And then the other thing that I'm very passionate about right now is on the subject of personalized feedback to promote learning and engagement. So like right now, 2 of my flagship products, Turn-In Feedback Studio and Gradescope, both focused on personalized feedback, but the magic is doing it at scale, and at the same time improving quality and consistency. Personalized feedback, is super critical for engagement, and I think that we all have a need for connection and belonging, and I think that if we want to engage students, we need to help them feel connected to the institution. We do that through personalized feedback.
Yeah, Martin, if I can come to you and say, did that notion of sort of productivity of our colleagues, ring a bell with you? Is that something that you see as an advantage of online assessment?
Yes, it rang a massive church bell for me. It is so underestimated how online assessments drive productivity. And I want to give you a very strange anecdote. I had a student that completed a master's degree with us where he did an assessment in a book. And a couple of years later, he came and we did online assessments. And this student wrote me an email to tell me that we are negatively impacting his ability to perform by requiring him to write an online assessment, and that he now need to type the assessment, and that he was actually better at writing an assessment in a book. And I responded to his email to say, you in your email say that you're more efficient and more productive in handwriting, yet you chose to write me an email and didn't write me a snail mail and put it in the post box for Postman Pat to come and deliver it. And when he responded to ask whether I'm being funny, I said, I'm not being funny. I'm trying to point out that assessment is an end-to-end process, which starts with the faculty that sets an assessment. Then there's a take of the assessment where the student would sit. Then there is a grading, the accurate, the individualized feedback that Mark was referring to, where there is absolutely fantastic tools with predefined answers of the typical things that you would like to give to the student. And then there's the ability to immediately at that point in time, when I've completed grading at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I press the release button and the student immediately have their feedback. So that activity of the student sitting for the online assessment may be slightly painful for certain students. And I fully agree with what Sarah and Marcus said in terms of the challenges. But if you look at the end-to-end learning process from setting the assessment to getting individualized feedback quickly back to a student, it is absolutely amazing. And the productivity and doing something simple like some of the tools that Mark have, I've read the student's assessment and I press a button and I leave a 30-second voice note to say, dear Keith, you wrote this assessment. I think you missed this particular aspect over here. I love this aspect over here. I think you have some growth opportunity here and I would love to share this example. I press save, I submit it, and you hear a voice feedback from your faculty. And it took me 30 seconds to give you a 30-second voice clip. That is unparalleled to any form of assessment we've had previously.
Yeah. And Sarah, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the inclusivity, not just of UK, but there's a lot of our EOCCS members, a lot of our certificate holders would, in a previous life, describe themselves as distance learning universities. Now, I think most universities now do things at a distance, whether they know it or not. So the inclusivity is not just for those sort of categories of people, but it's international as well. Is that something your survey was able to shine some light on?
I think very definitely, because I think certainly with COVID and over the last 2 years, everyone has been in that level playing field in a way. They've all been remote. They've all had to experience things in a very different way. And I think that has given our institutions more understanding, more compassion about the experiences that students are having. We run annual surveys every year for our students across the UK and across higher and further education. And what came through very strongly was that staff were having a far greater sense of how students were fitting learning into their lives around other work commitments, around caring commitments, and that the online environment did enable that to be a far more inclusive environment for those students. Obviously, there are always negatives, and I think we've already mentioned some of those. Martin, you mentioned the issues around online proctoring and perhaps invasion of privacy. We know there's issues around, screen time, well-being, that sort of sense of lack of community, lack of connection with staff. But overall, I think the themes that are coming through from this discussion is that there are credible benefits, if used well and if used appropriately, around productivity, around efficiency, and certainly within the UK higher education sector, online submission, online marking, the use of digital tools for feedback, as Martin was illustrating there, all offer those advantages. So yes, there is that support around needed still in terms of ensuring that our practices are more inclusive and accessible to all. There's still things that we can do in terms of improving our sort of productivity and efficiency, and also not just forgetting, just one other aspect there around also ensuring our staff as well as our students have got that digital capability and confidence to be able to also make sure that they are using the technology in the most appropriate way.
Excellent, thank you. And I'll stay with you, Sarah, because there's a connection here to where you were. I think it was yesterday you said at the Change Agents conference, and that's where I've met you before. But it is something that, again, you mentioned in your opening remarks, that it's a culture change, a mindset change for the traditional academics that would, see an exam, so let's put the exam online. But, what can individuals do? And our audience is here, a lot of them are practitioners in this. What variety is there in the forms of assessment that digital does well, that you've seen? Perhaps even through the Change Agent, because I know that's a marvelous sort of shop window of lots of projects from all over the place.
Well, certainly, yes. And just for those that may be wondering what a Change Agent, we at JISC have been supporting that initiative for the last 9 years around seeing students as active partners in the development of the digital environment and of their learning. And many universities now are working with students to gather their views on what works well for them, what are the areas they would like to see perhaps work differently, and to really sort of engage students in that sort of co-development and co-creation. And we have, through our work that we did an initial survey, as I've mentioned earlier, which highlighted the challenges, but we also did a thorough review of good practice that's taking place across the UK, but also internationally. And through that review, we pulled together a set of good practice principles for assessment and feedback, based on the fact that we felt that assessment is very much a process and part of learning, and that we should be thinking of assessment as learning. And that in a sense starts to change the dynamics, to change the conversation around where we should be moving our practice to. So we've developed these good practice principles, and I will put a link in the chat shortly. But for us, when we're talking about good assessment, we're very much starting with the pedagogy and then looking at the ways in which technology can support that. So for our good practice principles, we've got first and foremost helping learners to understand what good looks like, what good assessment and good feedback looks like. Supporting the personalised needs of learners, and I think that picks very much up on the points that were made earlier in this discussion. Ensuring that we are fostering active learning and looking at ways in which we have an active dialogue with our students as part of that process and as part of the feedback process. Being able to develop and support autonomous learners, looking at how we can manage and support staff and learner workload effectively through the good use of technology-enabled assessment, and also being able to promote learner employability and ensuring that the methods of assessment are then appropriate for the profession, for the workplace that those students are going into. So, for example, the way in which we've been seeing technology work very effectively is using different scenarios, online scenarios, where students can work through some real life examples of technology. One example in particular that I was fortunate to see this week was where we had the University of Staffordshire in their Healthcare Innovation Centre using a scenario-based approach to work with live, and I say live, but lifelike mannequins, to program those mannequins through their software and an immersive environment to replicate a ward, to replicate a medical environment of which their students were then working through the different tasks, being assessed in an extremely authentic way. So where we can start to use technology to bring in and to replicate the real world environment, and that having that authentic assessment practice, I think is really, really important. We've got some lovely case study examples, and I will put some links into the chat, that from the University of Sydney, using a way in which they use their student response system to give personalised feedback to large cohorts of students. We've got examples of the work in Netherlands with SURF, who are doing some work with feedback fruits, which is another digital tool that is enabling more personalised feedback. So there are a range of different practices out there that really support that personalised feedback, that authentic assessment experience. And it's thinking of that sort of end-to-end process of assessment and feedback very much being part of the learning process, rather than focusing solely on the endpoint exam, but thinking of it as the whole.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Martin, if I can turn to you and say, is that something you recognise at Stellenbosch, where you have, there have always been the traditional assignments, exams as assessments, but are you seeing a variety of different types of assessment coming through because it's been allowed by the technology? What I'm getting at is, are there ideas that our audience can take away with them that help them sort of rethink perhaps how they're assessing? And I'll ask Mark the same sort of question when you've spoken, Martin.
Keith, yes, undoubtedly. I'd like to take one step back, and then I'll get right directly to that. Just prior to starting, Humphrey, you were actually having a discussion with Humphrey, and Humphrey was talking about the onboarding of the students. So I think if there's one thing that I have learned that's extremely important, we've been at this for 7 years now. So we started in 2015. And sometimes I have to take our faculty and our program heads back to our own fear and interpretation when we started on this journey in 2015. And because we've gotten really good at online assessments, and because we do a lot of online assessments, we sometimes lose a little bit of sight of the students' fear for that. So I just want to tip my head to Humphrey, and I think that's extremely important, and where Sarah started actually. In terms of your question more directly, Keith, there's so many things we can do. And I was just thinking, when the quick poll that Camilla ran a poll, it took us 20 seconds to run that poll, and immediately you had the demographic distribution of your audience. Now that's absolutely magic. To mirror that in a class of 40 students, you would take at least 3 or 4 times as much time to have that accurate representation. And I saw that there was a fair amount of instructional designers. So the short answer to your question is absolutely. I see significant innovation within the assessment, but quite often it's the faculty approaching the instructional designers, where the faculty say, I've always played this exercise with the students in the class. I've always played the beer game, but I played the beer game with 1-cent pieces. I've always had these circles of discussion, but I did it by doing this. And because of all of our faculty, virtually all of our faculty, never having themselves part of online assessments, their traditional assessments, although they have very innovative assessment techniques, it was all physical. And when they approach the instructional designers, and the instructional designers say, did you ever think about maybe using a simple matching question just to test a higher level of cognition in here? Did you ever think about doing the following World Cafe exercise within a world environment? One of the things that I think that's really interesting that we do in one of our modules called Perspective on African Frontiers, the students at the end arrange a panel discussion of very prominent business people that discuss business on the African continent. And when we started having a conversation to say, but how do we actually assess that? Because it's such a fantastic learning opportunity, but what is it that we would like to assess? And what we then decided is that the students will online very quickly, collaboratively prepare a press release. So when the panel discussion is done, the students log into a collaborative platform, they sit for half an hour and they prepare a press release. And what they learn is the structure of a press release, what is a hook, what is important, the timeliness if you don't get it out within hours of the event. And they have collaboratively created something, and we take that and we grade that as a group activity that counts 10% towards the grade for the course, and it's all done and dusted. But it was somebody asking a question of, how do I achieve this? And I'm finding that it also permeates, because what happens now is if the students are saying, but for this particular module, I don't have to sit and write a test, we can actually have an interview with an entrepreneur, create a video of the interview with the entrepreneur, put it in a particular structure and extract the key lessons learned and put that at the end of the video and submit the video clip online. Mm-hmm. The students are starting to resist very mundane, old, outdated formal methods of assessment, which is really assessing the learning and not for learning. And that's actually the yeast that is driving the system forward and creating the culture that Sarah referred to right initially, creating the culture of wanting to be innovative in how we assess online.
And thank you for that, Martin. I can see how that, in a very broad sense, ticks a lot of boxes. You know, the collaborative. You know, we're talking about business schools here, preparing students for careers in business. And we all know, especially from the FMD side, business schools are different. You know, they're different to an engineering school, they're different to a medical school. There's a lot of similarities, but that authenticity that Sarah mentioned, and the need for this to be a realistic thing that, you know, boosts the skill that they're going to need in the future, like the press release. You know, that's a blog, you know, writing a report rather than an essay. It's a different skill. So thank you very much for that. Mark, if I can turn to you, I was very interested in your earlier comments about that sort of hybrid approach. And here's something, you know, that business schools are a very broad church. You know, at one end of the spectrum, we've got psychology. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got accounting and stats. And so a system for a business school is not going to fit everyone. But you have solutions, I understand, for those more numerical subjects where, you know, it's easier to handwrite, but then, you know, it's very difficult to mark them and to feedback on where the errors are. And all. I mean, is this one of the things that's sort of coming forward that actually you might have a solution for that?
I mean, we do. We have a platform called GradeScope that allows offline paper exams to be graded digitally, and it would be perfect for business school applications. And I attended business school. I went to Wharton, and to you know, kind of jump on the conversation here. As a student, some of the most valuable learning that I had were in courses where we had simulations that lasted the entire term. So every time we came to class, we were participating in this ongoing simulation. It was in one of our marketing classes, and it was a competition amongst all teams, and it was a required class, and everyone was competing. And then also in our macroeconomics class, we had a simulation that was similar to that. And it actually, you know, produced lifelong learning because of applying, you know, what I learned within teams. I mean, it was a really positive experience. The other thing I think as far as, what we should be doing is we should be designing, our assessments with feedback in mind, up front, not doing it at the tail end. And then also I think we need to coach faculty from not giving just a summative assessment at the end of the year and include, frequent low stakes formative assessments with mechanisms of feedback baked in, which is something I would probably, recommend as far as, what are some of the things that I can do to help my students.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. And if I stay with you, something I love to ask all of companies like yourself when I visit exhibitions, what's on the roadmap? What's coming? What sort of things are you working on that we can expect in the future that's going to support, make us more efficient, give better feedback?
Yeah, I mean, the area that I'm seeing evolving is how we help instructors, we call it in the parlance of product management, get their jobs done. But we're going to be using a lot of AI to do that. And some talk about the seemingly dystopian environment where bots replace instructors, and it's not going to be like that. And my hope is that AI will advance that, and it will relieve instructors from low-level repetitive tasks. And philosophically, that means viewing software as a productivity tool that frees up teachers' time so they can focus on what matters most, which is the art and science of student learning. So I think we'll see AI helping immensely. And it actually is starting now. So that's not to say that AI can't uncover insights to help teachers and administrators, kind of connect the dots. It certainly can, but I think that our biggest win is going to be in saving time. I know me personally, working in a remote world, it's been very difficult because I no longer commute to the office and commute back. So I don't have this demarcation of when work begins and where it ends. And I think in the online world for a teacher, it's very much the same. All those lines are blurred and we're becoming, kind of overworked. So I think one of the things that we can do to benefit education as much as anything is to give instructors back time. So, what does that kind of look like? I'll give you kind of a tangible example. Martin, you were talking about this Gradescope hybrid platform. So Gradescope, teachers can give either paper exam or problem set. And before Gradescope, teachers did this one paper at a time, right? By digitizing the paper and changing the workflow, we could serve up instructors each question at a time. And with that seemingly kind of simple change in workflow, and also adding a very innovative approach to rubrics, we dramatically save the amount of time in grading by making that one simple change in and of itself. But later we layered in artificial intelligence. This is where I'm talking about productivity. And what we did was we said, okay, we're going to group all the similar responses because many of the classrooms, there's over 1,000 students taking an exam. And we can group all those questions into like 5 to 7 buckets of similar responses. And the instructor, all they need to do from there is grade 7 buckets of questions. So, we're saving, our largest customer has now redesigned many of their assessments to use this AI assisted tool. And it's saving them tens of thousands of hours every test administration. And of course, all that time savings now the instructors can use it to benefit students and improve teaching in the classroom.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much for that sight into the future. Sarah, if I can come to you for a final time before we ask our audience for their own questions for you. AI, bots, are academics going to be made redundant? Mark suggests not.
I think definitely not. And I do love that example, Mark. I think, what you've shared there is the aspiration that we should be working for. I love that comment where you're saying actually to be able to give staff time back so they can focus more clearly on working with their students is, what we should be aspiring to. And I think I'll come back to the AI in a minute, but I think what we are trying to encourage our universities in the UK to be thinking about is working as course teams, looking at very clearly seeing assessment as part of that course and curriculum redesign, rather than thinking of assessment as an add-on, looking at ways in which they can be using some of the tools that are easily available and that they have within their institution, as Martin was saying there, more effectively to aid the continual feedback and assessment process as they go through the courses, looking at those opportunities for more authentic assessment and those workplace, making the assessments relevant to the workplace, to the professional environment. I think the AI is something that we are dipping our toe in the water in at JISC. And we have a number of sort of pilots happening at the moment with a product or a piece of software called Grade, and I will put a link into the chat to again look at ways in which we can help reduce staff workload. This is an AI-based assessment and feedback platform and aims to work with staff to look at the ways that AI can analyse student responses during marking, which again allows teachers to give feedback anywhere on students' approach, not just the final answer, and also learns how educators give feedback, so they're never having to mark the same method twice, and has the ability to mark multiple responses to save time. So I think AI, again, the message there is looking at ways in which we can use that to reduce the workload and to look at efficiencies there. But there's a lot of learning that still has to take place around that. And, we are, as I say, doing some research in that space, but very much aware of the research that's going on across the sector and internationally in this space. So I think more one to watch certainly in that area.
Thank you for that, Sarah. Martin, if I can come to you finally before we open up for questions from our audience. Is that a familiar pressure you have in your role, that for academic staff to be given a bit more flexibility, freedom, efficiency, efficiency tools? Is this a major thing in South Africa? I know it certainly is in the UK, because fees are fixed, but costs go up. And so the squeeze comes in the middle. So is that an issue with you too?
Yes, absolutely, Keith. No doubt. And I saw Andres posting there that the McKinsey report that says we spend half of our time on preparation, administration, and grading. And it's a very common pain that I hear collectively from the business school faculty in Stellenbosch and beyond around these non-value adding activities. So I'm very much aligned with what Mark has said. But Keith, if you allow me, there's one perspective that I think is important on the future. So there's the technological side, the machine learning and AI and all of these things, which is my love because I'm from the technical side. Then there's the cultural side, and I find that the technology is normally running ahead of the faculty. But there's something that people don't always have sight of, and it's when we digitize processes, we have information that we can do things with that we never dreamt of before. And I love to use that as my definition of big data, which is completely flawed, but it's a great conversation starter. And I say big data is the data that we have that was created for other purposes, which we can now make magic with. And I use the example of Istanbul routing buses based on cell phone density. Now, cell phones was never intended to route buses, but because we can have the cell phone data to route the buses, it's valuable. And online assessments, the future of online assessments is thinking about the data that is created within the process of being assessed, and how do we enrich that and how do we use that. And one very quick example, our students do peer reviews of each other. And at some stage I ask myself, but does how accurate one student reviews another student provide me with early insight on their own understanding? Because the students have multiple reviews, and then we created the peer review distance factor. So over a period of time, we used the students' review of other students to see how far or close am I to the norm. And we very quickly identified our poorer performing students because they were also not very good at assessing the work of their peers. Now, that's not the reason we do the peer review, but it creates this data to quickly identify students where we need to intervene. And I think for me, that's the beauty of online learning, with EOCCS, the world, but also online assessments. There's so much data that emerges from this process. We're limited by our own thinking and what else can we do with this to assist the students in their learning journey.
Thank you. And I think that's a great note to finish on, because it points us to the future. And I'll now thank our three panelists, Mark Espinola, Sarah Knight, and to you, Martin, and open the floor to our audience and say, are there any particular questions? Now, I think what we've got is we will retain the chat, and people who have watched these webinars before know that they end up on YouTube on our channel. We'll make sure all of those links are in there, even if they arrive after the event. But anyone want to ask questions of our panelists? I don't know, Camilla, I've not been watching the chat because I've been engrossed in the discussion. Are there any questions that have popped up? Or?
No, not so far.
Not yet. Let us invite people then to put
we
questions
have one
in the...
question for Mark from Andres. Do you have any concerns about tools like Copy AI?
Okay, Mark, is that one you've heard of, Copy AI?
I haven't heard of Copy AI, but we're definitely concerned about paraphrasing and bots that can actually create essays out of seemingly thin air that are difficult to detect, and we are working in that area very much so right now in the area of paraphrasing.
Okay, is that where you are, Andreas? If you can open your microphone, you can perhaps explain to the rest of us what Copy AI is.
Thank you, Keith. This is a tool that it's based on artificial intelligence, and it was fed with pretty much all text that is out there in the internet that you can access, Wikipedia's, like entire libraries, and it can produce text that is 100% original. You know, obviously nothing that you apply, not opinion, but you can ask this thing, write me a short piece on the history of Finland, and it does an amazing job, and it's original. So that was check it out. It's very interesting. And students are using it, I heard. So that was thank you.
That is definitely on our radar for sure. And we're working on it actively for sure. So, more to come. I don't have the exact timing of it, but it is a big problem for us to address and help universities with it.
And I think that's where Martin, it was your word about imagination that's needed here, not just with data, but with assessment too, different types of assessment. That, if we have multiple assessments for students, as well as their, not just summative, but the formative, the learning assessments as they go along, different types of them. Well, these bits of software, they can write an essay, but can they do a presentation when you've got to be the person doing the presentation? Can they work in a group for you?
Yeah, you're spot on, but there's also opportunity in this. I remember when I joined the business school, there was this big thing about Wikipedia 15 years ago. Students use Wikipedia. And should the students use Wikipedia? And I said, but we're asking this question all wrong. We're asking is, have our students contributed to Wikipedia to understand the mechanism? So I have around 800 examples of my students putting copy on Wikipedia, some being deleted, some surviving to this day. And I know about copy AI, Andres, and I've been toying with the idea of saying to my students, take a topic, ask copy AI to write about that topic, then analyze what copy AI has written and tell me how accurate is this artificial intelligence. So I'm actually circumventing the process. I'm teaching them about copy AI. I'm teaching them about the limitations within artificial intelligence, and I'm forcing them to actually go and do their research to figure out what copy AI said, whether that is correct. Now, I appreciate you can't do that in all courses, and I teach IS. So within IS, we teach about AI. So it's around how you think about the limitations. And I'm sure by the time that the students have circumvented that, Mark has invented something brilliant that we can pick up when it comes from copy AI.
It's just keeping one step ahead. How big a problem is this? Does JISC see, Sarah?
So I think, I mean, it's fascinating. And I think I love your response there, Martin, because I think that's absolutely right. And I think it is about teaching our students and helping to educate our students to know what is ethical practice and what the expectations are going to be in the workplace. And the more that we can instill that from first year right the way through, we would hope, along with designing assessments that lessen the ability to plagiarize, that we can start to recognize what is good academic behaviors and instill that into our students. That example, Martin, just reminds me as well of the work of Professor David Nichol, who was at the University of Glasgow in the Adam Smith Business School, and I will again put some links into the chat. His work is really interesting because it is looking at the value of encouraging students to self-reflect, to self-evaluate their understanding against another resource. So that example that you've just mentioned there, Martin, would be absolutely perfect to do. So I think we obviously have championed the banning of essay mills within the UK. We are doing all we can as well in terms of, again, providing support to our institutions to go back to thinking about the design of their assessments and looking at helping students understand what is good assessment literacy, what is good practice, and mirroring that the ethical guidelines that appear. So, you know, there's still work to be done, and we will, you know, we're very reliant on, you know, Mark's tools and support to be able to combat this as well. But I think we do also need to be looking at the reasons why students are behaving in that way.
Thank you very much for that. We've got some questions in the chat there. Noran, are you happy to open your microphone and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hello all. Actually, my question is, how can we deal with academic integrity and online assessment? So how can we limit cheating, for example? If we are doing like an assessment on Blackboard, for example, how can we do this? Because we have an issue with this. And that's why at AUC, we are limiting the online assessments somehow. If there's any best practices or anything that you can share with us.
I could have a very quick step, Keith. Noran,
thank you, Martin.
I'm lecturing at your institution next week, so we can share a
Really?
cup of tea, and then I can go into more detail. I think there's three things. There's what Sarah has referred to. It's pre-assessment. How do I design the assessment to limit the ability? Then it's during the assessment. We use online proctoring services, and there's a lot of online proctoring, various levels. There's some with AI, some with human proctoring, and then post the assessment, and that's a lot of the tools that Mark has at his disposal, the norma Turnitin and all of these things. And I think it's always a combination of how do you design the assessment, what do you do during the assessment, and what is the technologies that you use after the assessments to pick that up. And having said all three of those things, it actually all starts with the day the students enroll and the commitment and the honor code that the students make and the ethical leaders that they actually want to be. And I think that's the most important thing. And then the 1, 2, and 3 that I've mentioned comes into play.
Thank you very much. Mark, anything you can add to that, or we can go on to the next question?
I think Martin was spot on. I think the only thing I'd add is bring in a variety of assessments and measure often. and make some of those assessments lower stakes so that it would dissuade the incentive for, where we have integrity issues.
Okay, now Motion, if you're happy to open your microphone, perhaps you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we are collecting assurance of learning at Goodman School of Business in Canada for our ASCSP visit, which will come next spring. We have challenges and difficulties for certain goals. We have 5 learning goals: communication, critical thinking, professionalism, scholarly inquiry, and social responsibility. Especially when it comes, some of them, we have indicators or outcomes or traits under each one of the goals or objectives for instructors to assist the students. Some of them, they need in-person and dealing with the students in the class mode. So half of our traits are not collected or are not measured because, like appearance, for example, interactions. So how can you overcome all of these challenges if we cannot complete assessment in these traits?
Yeah, I'm looking there, and they should we really in an EFMD webinar be advising on AACSB accreditation? No, I joke, because we're all in the accreditation community, all good friends, and actually we're pointing in the same direction. So it is a very legitimate question. Panelists, do you have anything there that might help Motion in those, dare I say, softer skill areas that are being assessed?
Keith, I first want to compliment you on how well you dealt with that question. Motion, I think, is a challenge. We also have our ASCSB accreditation in a couple of months. And for me, ASCSB is a lot about evidence-based improvement. And the way that it sounds for me is that over a period of time, there's a lack of alignment between your methods of teaching, ability to create metrics, and what you have defined it as these metrics. And I'm now getting very personal, but what I've seen from these visits is, if there's it's either give me the metrics or explain why I could not give the metrics at that particular instance. And either you're going to go back to that mode of teaching and the metrics will remain, or you need to rethink the metrics and explain at the time of visit to the ASCSB that because of a change in modality of delivery, because of embracing the online world, some of the metrics that we dreamt up 3, 4, 5 years ago is no longer fit for purpose. And that's why an institution like EOCCS is so important, because it gives us the quality control formality to go with this new world that we're emerging into. I have sidestepped your question, but there is no clear, simple answer, because clearly you can't measure those things.
One solution, just to add, we requested a pre-visit meeting, which will happen at the end of this month with our peer review team chair. We're trying to raise all of these questions like 9 months before the visit, just to be to keep them informed and in the loop. Yeah, okay, thank you. Just one other question for Mark. Mark, if you can just share your tool that you are using at your school, so this will be beneficial for us as well.
Yeah, this is the grade mark tool, Motion, that you're
yeah, so so we have a tool called GradeScope that that's used globally now. It was a startup that was acquired by Turnitin about 5 years ago, and it's getting tremendous usage at major institutions globally right now. And it does solve a very difficult problem of how do you capture assessment questions that are difficult to put online. And there are types of things that you want to perform on within an assessment that can be challenging, to deliver online. So that's the tool that I was talking about.
Okay, and I have to bring this very, very interesting discussion to a close. We've used our allotted hour. And I can see there is one question on there, which, John, thank you very much for your question. I think that's a subject for a whole new webinar, practice-based assessment. So we'll take that on board, and you may see us reappear in the future looking at that particularly. But it is in business schools, in a lot of professional education, that is so important. Thank you very much to Mark, to Martin, and to Sarah, our panelists. Can I also thank everyone in the audience who's been here with us today and sharing these insights and asking some excellent questions. And can I thank Camilla on our team, who has been sort of behind the scenes in Prague, pressing the right buttons at the right time. Thank you very, very much, everyone. We will be advertising our next webinar. And if anyone has got, like John did, areas of interest on online education that they feel we could do a webinar about, we'd be very pleased to hear from you. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your days. And your day, Mark, I know is a lot longer than ours now, but enjoy that. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.